Here at Be Freaking Awesome, we believe that life is too short to be anything less than extraordinary. Join us as we explore what it means to live authentically, grow continuously, and have a blast while doing it. Let's get started.
Well, the learning, I think what it instills that's the prize, right? It's so powerful to think about, and one thing that I looked at a lot in my research also is thinking specifically about the literary imagination. So what happens when we read fiction in particular? So fiction is this beautiful thing that allows you to kind of occupy a different space, right? Kind of imagining other worlds. The more you can move in and out of different characters, the more you can imagine, different ways of being in the world, different ideas about, it really expands your imagination and your empathy. And I think those are two really key things for, in my mind, civic engagement and building a better world. Like, we have to be able to imagine a better world if we're going to build it. And I think the literary imagination plays such a key role in cultivating that type of imagination.
Angela, did you hear that? Fiction books count. Okay, fiction books count. This is a throwback to
maybe. Yes, I will never live down that I one time said fiction doesn't count. I wasn't saying fiction didn't count for you. What I was saying is that for me, it felt like I was eating candy, and I was supposed to be eating steak and potatoes or vegetables. I wasn't eating my vegetables of nonfiction book. I was eating candy and desserts of fiction books. But I have absolutely come a long way because, especially the last probably 3 or 4 months, I have been reading more and more. I like romance. And so I've been reading more multicultural romance, meaning like people just from like literally living in America. But what is it like to be a Black woman and dating a white man, and that their whole, the complexities, and hearing how those characters think. And I've read several from like people of different Asian descent and Hispanic descent. And when you're reading something that is comfy, like a romance novel that is going to have a happy ending, then it doesn't feel quite so heavy to learn about how people are feeling and thinking who are different than you. And so I'm actually having kind of glorious awakening over here, up in here. Fiction is absolutely counting because there are things that I have conceptualized on a nonfiction part of my brain, the logic part of my brain, with my equity work, that I didn't know how to translate into the feeling part for my equity work, which is really the fuel and the passion. So
yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because fiction, everyone knows, and we've heard this kind of said a lot, that like, storytelling is such a big part of like, who we are as humans. We've been doing it for thousands of years, but the beauty of fiction is there's so much room for connection. And I don't want to give the illusion that anyone who reads fiction is going to be empathetic or that it can build empathy. Like, there's lots of, I think out there's lots of scholarship that talks about that as problematic. But I do think that when we think about metaphor, right, or we think about the way that if I tell you a story directly about my life, you're going to connect in a specific way. But if I tell you a story, like a fiction story that I've written, that kind of touches all the topics or the experiences that I've had through like metaphors and through, I don't know, even like poetic language or whatever it might be, there's something different that happens there. And I think that's what I have always been really interested in isolating, is like, what does that type of space that we can occupy, where I can be here sort of in this place and in this person that I am, but also reading about these other types of experiences or these sort of like imagined worlds. There's so much power in fiction, and I believe that literature and fiction can change a life. It did mine. And so that's what I do all the time, is really talk to people about, like in the teaching, when I teach literature classes as well, it's often about like, how do we come together over a text? Like, how do we create connection in all kinds of ways over text?
Am I remembering correctly that that you do some interesting book clubs in your prison work? What did we talk about that?
Yeah, so I work. I'm a facilitator with a amazing program called Changing Lives Through Literature here in Massachusetts, and it is basically a gathering of people. We read literature together over a course of a few weeks, and in that course, it is people who have just gotten out of prison. So many people are on probation or on going through that process, and there's probation officers in the room and a judge in the room, and not in a judge or probation officer capacity, but just as people. We all show up just as people, and we read literature together, and it's so it's incredible because there's no hierarchy, right? It really, the judge goes by their first name, the POs go by their first name, and we just come together and we talk about. And I'll give an example. We read. I was so excited by this. I taught Frankenstein in that, which is kind of a difficult text. It's like a 19th century text. Sometimes people don't take to it. But we talked so much about what it means to, really understand other people and what makes a person monstrous, right? Like what makes a person do the things that they do. And it was such a beautiful connection point for everyone in the room.
Well, I think that's such a beautiful example of like when you talk about abolishing prisons and rehabilitation work, like, I mean, I know you don't call it this, but you essentially had a book club and we all we levelize the playing field and we, like that. How cool is that I'm imagining as someone who is re-entering society. And I had a beautiful opportunity a few years ago to speak to women who were about to leave. There was a women's prison here locally, and I actually got to speak on my birthday at just an encouraging word. And I was like, I never want you to call yourself a felon. Like you are a person. You're a person who has a felony. And I think anytime we can heighten our awareness to we are all people, we are all humans. And so in that book club scenario, I imagine I am a person who is enjoying literature, and this is a person who has a job. Like that judge is not different. He is a person who has a job. Yeah. And a PO is a person who has a job, and you will soon be a person who has a different job. And so I will not give my TED Talk. I will link my TED Talk in the show notes because I talk about this very thing. Anyway, I love that. I think that is beautiful and so hopeful. And I think your whole, like your story is such a message of hope. And I love your just hunger and thirst for education.
Yeah.
If somebody doesn't really, because I'm hearing some of the people that are like, I don't love to read. How do I cultivate that hunger and thirst?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think many people, when they think of reading, might think of like, oh, it has to be like literature, or like, right. It doesn't. It can be anything. It can be graphic novels. It can be romance novels. It can be bestsellers. It can be, you can start in small ways. Like one of the things that I did with actually in Fayetteville, we did a literacy workshop in the Juvenile Detention Center when I was working at the University of Arkansas. And we talked about literacy, and we talked about how our sort of idea of expertise, we're all kind of like experts in our own communities, or we all engage in certain communities and we speak the language of those communities. And that can be a lot of things, right? It can be like my D&D group, right? Or my book club, or my like whatever groups that you're a part of. Maybe I like to
make beer.
Maybe I'm like in a group that brews beer. Like,
yes,
you're literate in that sort of like discourse community. And so one thing you can think about is like, how did you become really knowledgeable on that particular thing? And start building, like if there's something you want to know, if there's like something you want to know more about, it's kind of replicate those steps, right? Of how you became an expert in a different area.
I love that.
And the shortest answer is that, the more you read, I think the more that you will start to like it, and the more you will build upon your ability and your stamina even for reading. So I think it's just about like starting small and making it fun. Like we don't have to all read like our high school English novels. You can read fun and interesting things. that whenever I was learning a different language, I would always read I did a lot of French, and I would always read the French instructions of like instruction manuals, or like the French on the shampoo bottle, or
Love it.
like I would always be like, I have to read the French version of this, and it's helpful. Like it was helpful. So like even those small acts of learning, I think, can be really, really powerful.
I want to add to this, especially when you're talking about, find something fun. I took a long hiatus on my own personal reading journey after high school and college, where there was so much assigned reading that I really felt like I'm out of this for a while. I got the book of the month club, and I started getting those books. A lot of my bookshelf actually has some of those books, some of which I have never actually read. And there may or may not be a book in the yellow section behind me that will specifically remain unnamed. I spent 1 year trying to read this book, and I got like 120 pages in it. And I was like, but you can't quit books. You're not allowed to. Like, that's disrespectful to the author for me to quit the book. And as a perfectionist and as an achiever and as somebody who just has respect for the world, I will finish this book. And so I kept trying, and I kept trying, and I kept trying. And that whole year I read only 120 pages of this single book. And I finally was like, this is killing me. And I can't even remember what book it was. There was some new book that came out that I was like, I really want to read this book. I'm not giving up on this other one. Okay. I'm not quitting. I'm just setting it aside for a moment. I'm going to go read this other book, and then I'll come back to it, because I'm not going to do that disrespect to the author. I read like 6 books in 1 week after I quit that book. I mean, I like devoured, but I was so thirsty. And
you're allowed to quit.
I know you're allowed to quit books. And so I actually, this year, I'm in a book club now, and inspired by one of my book club friends, I don't track books that I've read anymore. I did the first couple of years because that was really important for me to get my numbers up. And this year, I actually have no idea how many books I've read. I know it is more than I read last year. And last year I read close to 50 books. I am really proud that I have not finished 8 different books. I've quit 8 books this year. And that is a number that I do track, because on my own journey of like giving permission, you're allowed to start a book and say, this isn't for me, and keep moving, because there are hundreds of thousands of books out there. And so if you start a book and you're just like, meh, whatever, I'm not interested, you're allowed to move on. And even if everybody loves it and TikTok is talking about it and all of these people, who cares? Do you like it? Short. Yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes.
Life is too short to read books you do not enjoy. Like, right. I'm a big proponent of I put them down all the time. Funny enough, I'm actually like, I did research on a particular author, so I guess technically I'm an expert in that author. And I like put down 2 of their books. I was like, I can't do it. I don't want to read this one. I'll be an expert in all the other stuff, but it's too long. It's too boring.
Well, Angela, even you inspired me, because there's a nonfiction book, Breath by James Nestor, right? Not James Clear, James Nestor, that I was like, man, I keep meaning to finish that book. I set it down for a moment and I keep meaning to pick it back up to finish it. And you were like, oh, I didn't finish it at all. But I definitely I read this book. And I'm like, what do you mean you read it? You didn't read the whole thing. You're like, 60, 70%.
Here's the thing. Especially after I went to a author training conference, workshop, whatever the crap it was, that taught you how to write a book. I now know why I only read 60% of all books. Because there's a whole... let's peek behind the curtain. If you're going to listen to an author talk about all their books, then we're going to peek behind the curtain, which is in nonfiction books. The first third of the book, you set up the problem. The second third, you set up the solution. And the last third, you do application. And it's like showing examples. And so I'm like, oh, that's a waste of time anyway. If I got it. And here's the other thing I was going to say on quitting books, you absolutely can, and you don't ever have to pick them up. I do buy books, and I have had books that I have learned. I'm literally staring at one that I learned something reading the back cover and meeting the author. I don't ever have to read that. There's 25 habits in that. I don't know what any of them are. And my life is changed by just conceptualizing some of the things. And there's other times where I have books that I like. Some books are just real meaty. And so I read a chapter. I'm not gonna read. It took me 3 years to read The Body Keeps Score, which is shocking because I quote it all the time, but it is encyclopedic.
Yeah.
It is an encyclopedia. And so, like, do it at your own pace. There are certain books that I'm like, I read a page or two and then I put them back down. I know someone who had struggled with reading comprehension in high school, therefore thought they didn't like to read. Then when they were able to read on their phone and they could change the size of the text, either bigger or smaller, or on a Kindle, they found that there was an eye issue with how the size of the text that they were reading. And when they could change the size, then suddenly it was easier for them to comprehend. And then they gave up reading all the crap you have to read in high school and started reading romance. And now they love and devour books. And they're like I've read 60 books this year. And this is a person who 5 years ago would be a whole year did not read one book. And now 60 in the first half of the year. So it is a journey.
I also do want to just throw in, since we're having this conversation, I think audiobooks count.
Yes, they do count.
Audiobooks count 100%. And so stop discrediting yourself because you listen to an audiobook and you're like, well, I didn't read it. And if you're one of the people saying, well, you didn't read it, enough. We're done with that. That's old school. We're not doing that anymore.
I
consume the book.
Yes. Yeah, I definitely think audiobooks are great. I think any way that you are, and this is, I think, any way that you are learning and growing and expanding your imagination, your worldview, I think is an absolute plus. But I will say, there is no substitute for good old-fashioned reading. And I think that even if you try, like, if we're thinking about like how to become a better reader, how to become more interested, I think that there's something very important about our ability to read. And I know that there's all these studies like coming out about thinking about how much our generation is reading, like, etc. I think we have a lot of readers now. Like, there's book talk, right? Like, there's all these people are getting like it's becoming trendy to like, be really into book talk and stuff, which I love. But I think there is no substitute for reading. There's a sense of, I think for me, education is such a source of power in that you have to learn and you have to engage, I think, intellectually with the world in order to have more power. And the less we do of that, the less our communities do of that, the less our friends and family do that, like, the worse off we become as a society, as a community. So I'm just such a huge proponent of saying, like,
yes, Anne.
All of that, it counts, but also think about like really reading and really trying to read things that are difficult, like those are the things that are going to stretch. Like, if you think of your brain as a muscle, which, like, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a medical, but like, if you think of your brain in that way, the more that you activate it, the more that you stretch it, the more that you work it, the bigger and better and stronger it becomes. And I think that is the real power of literature. The real power of reading and education is like really strengthening that muscle.
I want to shout out to libraries, because I know that as we talk about this, then people can be like, I reading, I don't want to spend $10, $15, $20 on a book that I don't like. And making sure that people know that so many communities have good library systems, and it's not just your local library, but often they're part of the county-wide system. I've exhausted a lot of our library's ebooks that are available, and I'm actually looking at buying a membership to some other libraries. There is an app called Libby, which will let you tie in your library card. In case people don't know about that, I meet so many people. They're like, wait, what are you talking about? And I'm like, yeah, you can literally take your library card, put it into your Libby app, and then you can check out all of their resources. And
a lot of ebooks and audiobooks.
Lots of ebooks and audiobooks. So please don't let the idea... and I probably will put 2 TED Talks in the show notes, because mine, as well as the Fayetteville Library, is amazing. And if you ever come and visit Fayetteville, Arkansas, you should definitely put the library on your list. And their executive director gave an awesome TED Talk that was talking about the whole idea of literature or literacy, and not just reading, but digital literacy, and they have cooking classes, and they have podcast studios, and they have all these things. There's all these ways that we can be literate beyond just reading. So
absolutely.
Well, and I want to tying that even back into the education piece. One, Jessi, your story reminds me of the book Educated by Tara Westover. Just similar, like religious upbringing, homeschool, did not, and also ended up going on to get PhD. And despite a lack of childhood education, really, or self-pursued and taught. It's not a lack of, it's that there wasn't somebody there for you. I have some friends that I've been helping to pour into did not have somebody there to advocate for their education growing up. And he dropped out of high school and later learned he's dyslexic, and nobody like was there to help be there for this person and this kid to be like, no wonder that school is not working for you. You're dyslexic. Had an incarcerated father, had to drop out of school to go to work so they could help take care of things. And it is impacting his life today in ways that's really hard, that drive to go seek it out on his own wasn't there. There wasn't a lot of, he modeling. Ended up in a unique spot where he didn't see something else as possible. He didn't have books to see this is different. He didn't have something to see, well, maybe something could be different for me. And so it's something that there's not really a whole lot, not this big message for you all of like, here's what you should go do about that. But I don't know, just really emphasizing like finding ways to increase access to education, access to resources, especially people who are going to have a more vulnerable time. There's not as much safety net. There's not as much of people all over. I don't know. I think about my own children and just the privilege they have of myself, their grandparents, all of these things, and appreciating that while also wanting to make sure like, hey, does that mean I'm going to make some calls to local politicians to say, this is important to me. Like, let's stand up for libraries. Let's stand up for these things. Let's stand up for more resources at school. I don't know what that looks like for you all listening, but it's so important.
I think, there's a couple of things that you said that I want to pinpoint, which, and Angela also shout out to public libraries because, I spent a ton of time as a kid in the public libraries. That like I said, we didn't do much except like go to church and stuff. And we would also go to the library and we would just be let to roam around in the Greenbrier, Arkansas Public Library, a Shady Grove, Arkansas Public Library, or Shady something. I can't remember the town, but
Shady.
I'm like, wait, Shady Grove might be like a bluegrass song, but it was like Shady something. And we would go to the public library all the time, and that is where we accessed most of the books that I was able to get, and the books that my mom had at home. But we didn't have a ton of money. We were very below the poverty line, and I think it's so important that people have access, public access to these resources. And you mentioned like your friend having an incarcerated parent. Statistically, we know, and it sort of baffles me when like we know a thing and yet we continue to do the same thing over and over as if it's going to change. So the definition of insanity is we know that single parent households and the children of incarcerated folks suffer, right? Their education rates, their poverty rates, their addiction rates, their mental health rates, all these things are huge suffering commences when we incarcerate a parent. And yet we're still trying, as a state with very low education rates and all kinds of poverty problems, we're still trying to say, what we should do? We should imprison more people. We should build more prisons. It's a wild path that I think we don't have to go down. And I think, if I could shout out a few, there's an organization called Decarcerate Arkansas. There's also an organization called the Arkansas Justice Reform Coalition. These people are fighting really hard to prevent these prisons from being built. $750 million they tried earlier in the year to put towards this project. Imagine what $750 million could do for communities, for public, access to public resources. There's so many things that, can happen. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was Tara Westover's book, which I read and I absolutely love. And I feel like if anyone has told my story, it is Tara Westover. we weren't Mormon, but everything else is pretty similar in terms of, you know, what it took for me, I think, to come out of that. And I realize now I'm so incredibly lucky. I was in rooms all the time with teenagers, you know, who were in these circumstances that I was in, that were suffering from immense poverty, who had incarcerated parents. And there was so much drugs. There was so much, you know, really harmful activity going on around me, in the room with me, being offered to me. I've had friends die of like overdoses, of all kinds of, you know, stuff related to that environment. And I didn't do those things. I said no, not because I was like, oh, let's say no to drugs, or that any of those programs really taught me to do. It had nothing to do with that. It was, I really wanted to do well in school. Like, I had just started community college at the age of, like, right at the age of 18. I just turned 18, started community college. And I thought, oh, well, if I do this line of whatever, I might not make it to my tutoring, or I might not be present for the class. And like, I really want to, like, I was loving the learning so much because I had been so deprived of it, that I thought, well, if I do these drugs, I might not be able to like make it through. Like, what if I get a B, you know? And I just think so much about how that access to education changed the course of my life, because I could very well be like many of the people in those circumstances, some who never got out, and some who did. And I think I'm so thrilled that they're living full and successful lives, but many of those people didn't. And I just think about, you know, that's the option really, in those situations often is desperate actions, to get out of situations that are already really desperate. And so I think education is the great equalizer. And, you know, I went to Pulaski Tech in North Little Rock, a community college, got my associate's degree. Well, I got my GED before that. There was no high school graduation, in the homeschooling, you know, situation. I went to a tutor. I got my GED, and I remember going to Pulaski Tech, and community college is funny, right? It's people who would never normally be together, intergenerational, different races, different classes, different cultures, and you're all in a classroom together. And I was like the 17-year-old kid with people who were like in their 60s, and tons of people from other ethnic and cultural backgrounds that I had never encountered. And I just remember being like a little afraid at first, but it was the most enriching experience of my life. I was like, oh my God, like this is it. Like, I want to be here, like on a college campus forever. And that's, and that's
where you are.
And that's, I was like, I'll just be here forever. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. This, I know we could probably continue talking for hours and hours longer. Yeah. And so unfortunately, we're going to try to land the plane. If there's one thing that you wanted to leave people with, one encouragement or just a piece of you to share, what would that be?
Oh my gosh. I have so many. I'm like, what is like one thing? Like, honestly, I think there's two things. One is, the biggest thing is, it doesn't have to be this way. And I think that applies to your current life situation, right? It applies to our current political situation. It applies to our, you know, the way we do punishment in prison in the United States. Like, it doesn't have to be this way. And if you can imagine something better, if you can build something better, do it. Build your life in a different way, build your community in a different way. But I think just that to me has been, I think that's the biggest thing I would say is it doesn't have to be this way. And it hasn't always been this way. And I think the second thing would be to just, you know, anywhere we can make education accessible. If you have a friend or a person at church or a person, you know, in your community where you can see these situations kind of occurring, think about how to engage, right, your neighbors. Yeah, I guess that would be like the things I'd like to leave people with.
I love that. Thank you so much. Angela, did you have any wrap-up thoughts?
This is so good. Thank you. I was just thinking of the people I was already thinking of the people I wanted to share the episode with. I'm actually friends with the founder of the Arkansas Justice Coalition. So
amazing.
Yeah. I love Sarah Moore.
There's a lot of people in Arkansas doing really good work.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I want to shout out one person, which is Dr. Lee Sparks. She's an English professor at the University of Arkansas. And her prison literature class as an undergrad really changed my life and helped me see, I think, like this, just the beginnings of the work that I do now. So thinking a lot about the systemic issues related to prison. So thank you, Dr. Sparks.
I love that. Thanks so much for joining us, everyone, for this conversation today. And I don't know, maybe if there's that one person who sort of changed direction for you, I'd encourage you guys to go send them a message, say thank you, and share this episode with them. Say, in spirit of this episode, just want to say thanks for changing the direction of my life. Thank you, Dr. Jessi Brewer, for joining us. And
Thanks
until
for
next
letting
time,
me.
Until next time, everyone, we hope you guys go be freaking awesome.